The cameras are rolling, and the young man standing on set is not supposed to exist in this exact form. He has his uncle's cheekbones, his uncle's eyes, the same nervous grace in the shoulders, the same softness in the mouth that used to break a stadium of strangers into tears. He lifts his chin, and for a half second, the crew forgets who they are looking at. Somebody on set later admits they had to turn away, because the boy in front of them is not Michael Jackson, but he is carrying something Michael left behind, something the family has been quietly bleeding for 15 years. And tonight, without anyone fully realizing it, Jafar Jackson is about to do the one thing no lawyer, no estate, no documentary, and no posthumous album was ever able to do. He is about to give the legacy a pulse again. For years, the Jackson name has been less a legacy and more a battlefield. Lawsuits, documentaries, accusations, counter-accusations. A catalog worth billions and a reputation worth almost nothing in certain rooms. Every time the family tried to defend Michael, it backfired. Every time they stayed silent, it got worse. And in the middle of that long, exhausting war, almost nobody was watching the quiet nephew in the background. That was the first mistake. The cruelest thing about Michael Jackson's legacy was not how the world destroyed him, but how it fully expected his own blood to finish the job. To understand the sheer gravity of that silence, you have to look at what Jafar Jackson was taught to fear. Long before he was an actor, he was a survivor in the blast radius of the most famous family on earth. When you grow up with the last name Jackson, you learn very early that public adoration is just a mask for public consumption. Jafar was only 12 years old when his uncle died, thrust into a global media circus that traded in tragedy, conspiracy, and endless mockery. He watched from the inside as the world devoured his family's grief. The emotional lesson he absorbed in those formative years was absolute. Attention is a predator, and the only way to survive it is to stay invisible. By the time the Michael Jackson biopic was officially announced, the Jackson estate was fighting a brutal, unwinnable war. The legacy of the King of Pop had been dragged through a decade of posthumous allegations, tabloid sensationalism, and deep cultural skepticism. The public did not want a sanitized hagiography, and they certainly did not trust the family to provide an honest one. When the estate announced that Michael's own nephew would play the lead role, the internet did not just doubt Jafar Jackson, it actively prepared for his execution. The consensus was immediate and vicious. Critics called it a tone-deaf PR stunt, a hollow attempt to control the narrative using a puppet who happened to share the family DNA. Almost nobody noticed the quiet, almost dangerous obsession happening behind closed doors. While the internet sharpened its knives, Jafar was not studying his uncle's greatest hits. He was studying his uncle's deepest wounds. To play Michael Jackson, you cannot simply learn the choreography. The moonwalk is just mechanics. The true essence of Michael was rooted in a profound, unbridgeable isolation. Jafar understood something the critics missed. His uncle was not a god, but a man who had been forced to perform his own childhood away. Jafar didn't just want to mimic the voice, he needed to reverse engineer the trauma that created it. Stop here for a moment and look at this from the perspective of a director. Antoine Fuqua, a filmmaker known for gritty, uncompromising realism, was tasked with navigating the most heavily scrutinized set in Hollywood history. He needed an actor who could handle the pressure of a billion-dollar franchise and the emotional weight of a shattered icon. According to those on set, Fuqua quickly realized he was not directing an impersonator. He was watching a young man willingly undergo a psychological exorcism. Jafar was tapping into the generational trauma of the Jackson family, using his own memories of the 2009 fallout to fuel a performance that was less about imitation and more about resurrection. The physical transformation was only the beginning of the erasure. Jafar subjected himself to grueling, punishing rehearsals that mirrored the notorious perfectionism of his uncle. He had to alter his posture, his cadence, the very way he breathed. But the true genius of his preparation lay in the eyes. Michael Jackson's public persona was built on an ethereal, almost alien detachment, but his private eyes were famously heavy with sorrow. When the cameras rolled, Jafar did not play the pop star. He played the casualty of fame. He captured the exact micro-expressions of a man who was constantly bracing for an attack. Then came the footage that paralyzed the skeptics. When the first teaser trailer dropped, the cultural conversation experienced a violent, immediate whiplash. Millions of viewers who had logged on to mock a nepotism hire found themselves entirely disarmed. It was not just that Jafar looked like Michael, it was that he moved with the same fragile, electric vulnerability. The internet, which thrives on cynicism, suddenly had no vocabulary for what it was witnessing. Jafar Jackson had just saved his uncle's legacy, and he did it by refusing to defend it. Instead of offering a polished, defensive portrait, he offered a raw, bleeding one. Here is the detail almost everyone misses about playing a ghost. When you channel someone that completely, the ghost eventually demands to be the only one in the room. The very thing that made Jafar's performance a masterpiece is the exact thing that threatens his own artistic future. To save Michael's legacy, Jafar had to completely hollow out his own identity. He had his own music, his own face, his own trajectory. But the moment he slipped on that sequined glove, he signed a contract with history. He proved he was the only person on earth who could carry the crown, but in doing so, he ensured that the crown would never let him go. The validation from the family was swift, but it carried its own complicated weight. Katherine Jackson, Michael's mother, wept when she saw the footage, stating it was like having her son back. For a family that has spent decades locked in bitter litigation and public infighting, Jafar became the ultimate unifying force. He was the one thing the fractured Jackson empire could agree on. But look closely at what that means. He is no longer just Jermaine's son, or a young artist trying to find his own voice. He has been elevated to the role of the family's living monument. The pressure to maintain this perfection will follow him for the rest of his life. This is where the story turns from a Hollywood triumph into a psychological trap. The public loves a redemption arc, but they rarely consider the cost paid by the savior. Jafar Jackson succeeded because he understood the dark, unspoken truth of his family's history, that their greatest asset was also their most devastating curse. He used his intimate knowledge of that curse to create art. But what happens when the movie ends? What happens when the makeup comes off, the fedora is put away, and he has to walk into a room as just Jafar? The world will no longer allow it. They have seen the ghost, and they will demand it on command. Consider the sheer emotional toll of carrying the weight of a legacy that half the world still wants to burn. For years, Michael Jackson was defined by his contradictions, the genius and the eccentric, the victim and the villain. By embodying him so flawlessly, Jafar has absorbed all of those contradictions into his own body. Every interview he gives, every red carpet he walks, will be measured against the phantom he resurrected. He saved the legacy by proving that the Jackson magic was real, but he also proved that the Jackson tragedy is inescapable. He was not ruined by success. He was consumed by what success required. The industry will praise his dedication, award his performance, and box office records will shatter. But behind the glamour of the premiere, there is a quiet, devastating reality. Jafar gave the world the ultimate gift. He gave them back their idol. But to do it, he had to surrender the one thing his uncle spent his entire life desperately searching for. He had to surrender himself. When the final cut of the film eventually plays in theaters, the applause will be deafening. Audiences will cheer for the music, they will cry for the lost childhood, and they will marvel at the illusion. They will look at the screen and see Michael Jackson, vibrant and alive, dancing through the pain. But almost nobody will see the young man underneath the makeup, the nephew who loved his uncle enough to let his own identity die so that Michael's could live forever. The legacy is finally safe. But the price was everything Jafar had.